back to Wake Up Belize Morning Vibes. We're not going to take no phone call for and leave it, but I'll open up the phone lines once we finish reasoning and leave it with the guests. We have two guests this morning. One of them no stranger, he's in a family now. But the first time to meet the next sister. Good morning, Sister Doc, Activist-Educator Rosemari Mealy, and Brother Mutota. I know the soon up on my screen. I want to soon up. There you go. My peoples, good morning.
Good morning.
All of the people I say the people, watch out, Brother Akko, the Eki said for the pretty dashike. I tell you. Morning, Sister Doc. Morning, Brother Akko. How the morning?
It is an honor to be here this morning. Good morning, Belize. And thank you so much for having us on today.
Give thanks, sis. Brother Akko, how the morning?
Good morning, Sister Yaya. Good to be on your show again this morning, and good morning to the listening audience.
Give thanks. So I framed the conversation before I introduced the both of you. I know Sister Doc is working with some young people right now in the United States with the intention to take them on a delegation. And the concern specifically would be disinformation about Cuba and the support needed for the Cuba Medical Brigade. Before we address that specifically, Sister Doc, Rosemari, can you tell us a little bit about your awareness, your knowledge about Cuba over the years? As tight as you could make it, because we need shorter answers for use up a lot of the time.
Definitely. Decolonizing the mind that's the key. I grew up in the southern part of the United States, and obviously the racism was stark. You know, I knew it. I grew up under racism. So therefore, I'm always, in my mind, I'm struggling against it. And of course, I was fortunate to have, my father was an activist also. And then just being taught that you have to search for the truth. And once you find the truth, then you carry it on. And so over the years, that has been my objective, my goal, sharing that truth, learning, studying. Brother Akko and I were just talking briefly about the importance of study. And so that's been foundational for me, to know, to study what they say, that outside of the traditional educational system, because you're not going to get what we've learned over the years inside of the educational system, because it's a Eurocentric educational system set up, designed to keep us brainwashed. So my orientation has always been to go outside of traditional studying, learning, and organization, being a part of organization, and then going to those places that they tell us is horrible. And then you go there and you find out that it's totally different than what they've told you. So that's my orientation. And I had the privilege of living and working in Cuba under a new kind of government that was different than what I grew up under. And of course, I realize that they have problems there, but I also understand that 99% of those problems emanate from the fact that for more than 60 years, this country has been in the forefront of attempting to destroy the Cuban Revolution.
Thanks, Sister Doc. Brother Akko, what has been the historical track record of Cuba and governments and people in the Caribbean?
So, to answer that question, Sister Yaya, I want to sort of begin with a quote by Simon Bolivar, because I think to understand what's happened, we have to understand the role the United States plays in the Americas, and has played in the Americas. And I think that will contextualize what happens. Simon Bolivar said, and I'm quoting, "The United States seems destined by providence to plague the Americas with misery in the name of freedom." And so what has happened to us in the Caribbean is that U.S. policy toward us, whether it is the intervention in Grenada or in Chile or in Jamaica or the occupation of Trinidad by U.S. forces during the Second World War. It is a policy that has impacted misery upon us. And that is the relationship between the Caribbean and the United States. Right? A glaring example of this, I would say one of the first examples of this in the Caribbean is Haiti, occupying Haiti for over 15 years. And then and not only did they occupy, they also occupied Cuba. And after the Cuban Revolution, continued to work to destroy the Cuban Revolution while also working to destroy the Haitian Revolution and any other movement that emerged in the Caribbean. And to me, that is the relationship. It is a relationship of misery, a relationship of exploitation, and a relationship of subordination. And that is what we are fighting against, what the liberation movement has been fighting against. We want our sovereignty. And all of this thing that you see with Cuba and Haiti is about our sovereignty and our independence. So to me, that is the context of between Cuba and between the United States and the Caribbean.
Thanks, Brother Ako. Sister Doc, oftentimes we don't know what the reality of Cuban people. The most that we would engage Cuban people is when we have the medical brigades, and it's still within a professional space. What is life like for Cuban people? We know that it's hard for them. But what is life like? What is life daily for Cuban people over the past 60 years? And I mean, especially the everyday people.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing you have to establish, and this links to what Brother Ako is saying, Cuba is an African nation. Cuba is Africa. And that's the first thing. You go there and it's black folk practicing the indigenous religion, Santeria, Candomblé, like in Brazil. But the uniqueness of the country is foundational to the spirituality of the country, okay? And that's an important piece. So everyday life for Cuba after 1959 shifted tremendously, because before 1959, as Brother Ako said, the economic interests, the strategic concerns, the whole idea of maintaining stability, that was forefront for the United States. So when the 1959, 1960, when the Cuban Revolution occurred, it shifted the narrative. It nationalized the land, right? It educated the people. It was a literacy campaign where thousands of people were taught how to read and write. Peasants in the countryside, young people going out into the streets, going out into the countryside. Cuba became a literate society. So when you have a literate society, people can think for themselves. And that became the mainstay of the revolution. People educated. Healthcare, everything shifted, like I said, free healthcare for the people, education, housing based on your income, jobs. I mean, and because the country nationalized, much like what happened in Jamaica, and we know what happened there on the Mealy. The country nationalized, and therefore the wealth went back to the people. And so the life of the people shifted and changed. And it had to do with the shifting of an economic system, okay? So life was still difficult because you still had the United States. They didn't like that. They did everything to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. But because of international solidarity, the role of the Soviets who came to support, Cuba was able to develop. It was able to develop, moving away from more of an agrarian society to the tourism, people coming in from all over the world. So the economic structure shifted, okay? And so, but for 60 years, that became a source spot, in a sense, to the United States government. And they did everything that they could to overthrow the Cuban government. But the people always stood strong because under Fidel, they recognized that this was a different kind of society for them. It was doing everything that we hoped for and we wanted to do all over the world. The decolonization of what happened in Africa, Angola, Mozambique. But so what I'm saying is everyday life for Cubans it shifted, it changed. You know, your children could go to school for free. You could get health care for free. And the state was providing this, but you were also, your mind was changing. People were being educated to understand that to live in this kind of society was really a society that was about humanity. It wasn't about profit and corporate interests. So life, you know, life was better. But then over the years, with this 60 plus years of this U.S. Some people call it an embargo, they call it sanctions, we call it a blockade, because the U.S. government has laws that determine what that policy and what that relationship would be to Cuba, and those policies and those laws extend globally. You know, from a legal perspective, it's extraterritorial, as we say, meaning that the laws of the United States impact other countries around the world, around trade. And so Cuba right now is going through an economic crisis. We call it economic genocide. That is exactly, from a legal perspective, that is exactly what it is. They are trying to starve the people, food shortages, petrol shortages, because Cuba can't trade on the world market. And so therefore the needs of the people right now are they're suffering. But, you know, on the other side, they're being resilient. They're still fighting against the empire. And that's the substance. That's the substance that carries through. But, you know, the immigration problem, young people are leaving. And then so what happens is, and this is my final point, what happens is the anti-Cubans, who are now, you know, foundational in the United States, but they're all over the Caribbean, they're all over the world. You have the opposition now that's attempting to openly sabotage everything. And so what do you do to sabotage the people? You starve them, right? You make them angry, not at what's causing the problem, but at the government. And so but then on another side, that you have young people who are defending the revolution. The education is continuing to be free. The healthcare is continuing to be free. And see, that's where this global health brigade issue comes in, because Cuba educates thousands and thousands of doctors and healthcare personnel from the Caribbean, from all over the world for free, even giving scholarships to students here in the United States. Can you imagine that? So you have to, and so what happens is the global health brigades have been able then to utilize the resources with these contracts that have occurred with the various countries. And that's been a very important part of the economy for Cuba to sustain itself. So the US goes after a major economic component of the Cuban Revolution, and that is their healthcare system and what they've done in healthcare globally. So you attack that, and that's where we stand now. They want to destroy that, but under the guise that the doctors and the nurses and the healthcare personnel who are working in countries such as yours and the rest of the Caribbean, that they are being used as slave labor, right? That's the argument that they're using. And then unfortunately, some countries are buying that. Especially the first one to fall under that was the Bahamas. They canceled the contract, and so that is a struggle that's going on now. So I hope that kind of contextualizes the aspects of our discussion this morning.
It definitely did. I have to go to break, Brother Akko. When I come back, I want you to respond to. I think it's surprising that a number of heads of states in the Caribbean are saying we're not cutting ties with the Cuban Medical Brigade. And it's seldom that you see heads of states in the Caribbean stand up to the superpower of the United States. So when we come back after this short break, I want Brother Akko to respond to that particular collective action of a number of Caribbean countries in response to the United States threatening to take visas away from heads of state and their families if they don't cut relations with the Cuban Medical Brigade. To Wake Up Belize Morning Vibes, we're having serious reasoning with Sister Doc Rosemari Mealy, who's an activist educator. Trust me, for she's CV through the door. decades are working on behalf of working class people for their liberation. And Brother Aka Mutota, revolutionary founder of the Twin Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, co-host of Sunday Review. Brother Aka, the question I asked you before break, what are your take for a number of Caribbean heads of state standing up to the empire, United States, and say, come for the visa if you don't want. We know to give up the Cuban Medical Brigade program what we have for years will benefit the citizens of we countries.
So yeah, I applaud any attempt to defy the United States by our Caribbean leaders. But I'm also very much aware of their history of spinelessness and compromise. So there sometimes, and I've said this before, that Caribbean leaders know what to say when. They are, in that regard, they are good politicians. So while I applaud and commend the statements made in support of Cuba, I am extremely skeptical about their ability to sustain that position. Now, if you take the case of Guyana, for example, I think there are over 400 Cuban doctors, if I'm not mistaken. The president of Guyana, well, not the president, but the vice president, who many consider the real president, Jack Dale. Okay, in a statement, he said that they have to be very careful because the United States is their major partner, and in the situation that they have with Venezuela, they may need the diplomatic and other kinds of support of the United States. So already you are seeing that he is hinting at some form of compromise. Mia Motley has taken a very strong position that they could take her visa, but I'm not so sure that there are many Cuban docs, if any at all, in Barbados, right? So she could be speaking from a position of she has nothing really to lose, so it's good to talk tough, right? And I say this in the context of previous experience with Caribbean leaders. If you take a man like Bonham, all this anti-imperialist rhetoric, while at the other hand, he was the man who was implicated in what happened to Walter Rodney. So that's our history, right? In Trinidad and Tobago, we have, I think, like close to 100 nurses and some doctors. Not very many, as far as I know. I know in my community there are Cuban doctors. I saw one, just a few months ago. The last prime minister took a strong position relative to that program. The current government, which was in opposition, they are very they are wafflers, right? In opposition, they say one thing. When they get in government, they say another, right? So we don't know what is the situation in Antigua because I understand they are under pressure to eliminate the program. But and so those are some of in Jamaica. They have taken a very strong position because Jamaica is very much dependent on there are over 400 Cuban doctors in Jamaica. They are the linchpin of the Jamaican health system. In fact, I was listening to an interview a couple of weeks ago with Rachel Manley, who's the daughter of Michael Manley. Right? It's a new radio station launched in Trinidad. And she was saying on the interview that just a couple of weeks before, her sister-in-law was involved in an accident. And in the area where she was, in the health center or the hospital, electricity went. And the Cuban doctor stood there manually and for over 20 hours, right? Provided health care for that person. And that is what saved her sister-in-law's life, which testifies to the importance and the necessity of the Cuban doctors in the Caribbean. But relative to our leaders, I am not sure that we can rely on them to defend this thing. So there has to be a mobilization from the ground. So they talk nicely when it's convenient, and when it serves their interest in particular ways, but they are not reliable. They are absolutely not reliable. So we have to really mobilize from the ground up, to let people, the masses who benefit, right? Like in Trinidad, for example, I have a friend, right, who went to the hospital and they told him he had Addis foot. And it is a Cuban doctor diagnosed him with a particular form of skin cancer.
Yes.
You understand the point I'm making? So that is the kind of thing we have to, these are the examples we have to look at, and people who have experienced the benefits of the Cuban medical brigades and not rely on the Caribbean leaders. We welcome what they say. We hope that they will follow up on what they say. And we hope they will show spine, and carry through on what they are saying. But they cannot be trusted and they are not reliable.
Big respect, Brother
Yeah.
Akko. Sister Rosemari,
Yeah.
the concern
Yeah.
is that the majority of the people who benefit, the oftentimes working class people, struggling people, so then just in a survival mode. And people hesitant for go up on record and say anything because victimization is real. So how do you propose that the mass of the people in the Caribbean would benefit from Caribbean Medical Brigade services? Show solidarity?
Thank you, sister. The strength of what happened in Jamaica was Jamaica has a very strong, from the ground, Cuba solidarity movement, right? And it was the Jamaican Cuban solidarity movement that actually helped and was really behind Jamaica crafting the government crafting the response to Rubio when he came to the region. So brother Akko is absolutely correct. And even, mass struggles, it has to be the progressive leadership in the countries who are going to take the lead to mobilize the people, right? And so, as I said, for example, and then you use those examples. For example, Dr. Raf Gonzalez out of St. Vincent, he acknowledged that hemodialysis project that employs Cuban doctors is a lifesaver for folks from St. Vincent, right? So what you do is, if there are progressive entities within each of the countries, they are going to have to step forward and begin to mobilize, and then you bring in the folk who have been the beneficiaries of the healthcare. And I'm not trying to tell people how to organize, but I think that Jamaica is a perfect example of the power of the people in terms of mobilizing the grassroots based on the experiences of the people who have received the healthcare. And so that is my base, and then that's what we have to do in this country. We don't get everybody here. I mean, they don't even allow us to have Cuban doctors here. I mean, one point that your audience may not know, when Hurricane Katrina came to the U.S. in Louisiana and thousands of black folk were dying and trying to get out of there, Cuba offered to send medical brigades because they know about disaster medicine, right? And under the Bush administration, they just said, no, they can't come in here. So you all, the countries that we're talking to today, are in a position that you don't have that kind of a restriction. So the power has to come. The power has to come from the people. And so that is my response to you.
Respect
and
to
that's
that.
not
I'm showing Belize has a Belize-Cuba Solidarity Group, and on February 18th, they sent out a press release, Belize-Cuba Solidarity Group Declaration of Support for Cuba. Some years ago, I was affiliated with it. I'm not anymore. I don't know, other than send out the press release, if they're doing any information sharing, any organizing on the ground, any pressuring of the state. I don't know. So I appreciate you mentioning that as a point of entry. In Jamaica, one of the things, like there's somebody's texting me right now, we don't know enough about the program. I don't know, like, something would have had to happen, like maybe it's a special holiday in Cuba, or there's a U.S. issue like this, for you to hear something about the Cuban Medical Brigade. But we don't know the details of, I was pleased that Brother Akko did the research to say how many personnel would be on the ground in a community. But the Belize, I can't tell you how long we they have Cuban doctors and nurses, how much are they come, how much they get paid, where the money go and time they get paid, how much the Cuba government get. We don't have the details. One of the points of interest, when in the past few weeks, a number of the unions in Belize were holding the government of Belize accountable, primarily because of money issues for them. And the state saying, we don't have the money for paying a pension or an increment or an increase. And one of the things that was said is that they looked at buildings where a high amount of rent is being paid. And they're like, look, we could look for a cheaper building. But one of the things that came out is that a high rent was being paid at a particular building for Cuban personnel. Now, for a lot of Belizeans, that's the first time we hear that. But without consistent communication between the state and the people as they relate to the Cuban personnel, and again, most people don't know the difference between capitalism, socialism, communism. So they're not engaged like that. So we need more information about this program. I understand a number of people have left the program. Like they just left, they come to our country and then they left the program. So what are some of the critiques both of you have heard about the Cuban Medical Brigade program?
Well, if I may go first, the opposition, those who are opposed to it, and the U.S. government is using that strategy. You see, each country has a contract with the Cuban Ministry of Health. The contract is between the country and Cuba's ministry. Part of that money from the contract goes back to Cuba to help to continue funding the free health care in Cuba and the medical training of foreign and international doctors who are coming to Cuba to study medicine for free. Okay, so that's now the argument that the U.S. and the opposition is using is that the doctors and the healthcare personnel who come into the country are being trafficked for slave labor, not letting people know that if you, number one, all the doctors and healthcare personnel who come on the medical brigades, they volunteer to do so. They volunteer to do so. And they are paid a stipend the same way that they would be paid while they're paid at home. Okay? And also in the country of residence, they are provided some amenities, to my understanding, and maybe that goes to what you're talking about, as a part of the contract where they're going to live, right? And what have you. So that's the way it's structured, you know. And so the trafficking issue becomes a very important issue for a country when you're working with the labor movements in those countries. So it seemed like to me that there would be some kind of a relationship between the governments and the labor movements in those countries to make sure that the labor laws are parallel or consistent with the laws of the country. I don't know that, and that's another argument that the U.S. is using. They're approaching labor movements in those countries that they want to stop the medical brigades, and some of them are signing on to the fact that, yes, the Cuban doctors are being paid more than the doctors who are here. The healthcare personnel, they get amenities, they get privileges. And that has to be debunked, because those arguments then are used against the continuation of the Cuban medical personnel providing life-saving health to the peoples of the countries where they are.
Big thanks for that information, Sister Doc Rosemari Mealy. And that's because I don't hear nobody to put to a financial cost on the lives being saved, on the time, and there's a cost to all the years of service that they've provided. I'm sure it will outweigh what's actually exchanged in dollars and cents. Brother Akko, what pushback have you heard about the Cuban Medical Brigade?
I have not heard much, relatively speaking, from Trinidad. But just to take on a point that Sister Rosemari made here, the hypocrisy and the duplicity of the United States to talk about human trafficking. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous for the United States, a country that exterminated the indigenous people, enslaved Africans, right, passed Jim Crow laws, right, continue to pay wages that are 19, right, like my wife was telling me recently, we had a small business in Atlanta, and since we came back to the US, she got a job. What we were paying our manager in 1990, she's now making as a supervisor. So you're talking about human trafficking, right? And you are exploiting your workers, and you want to, show some light as if you are some noble example of human trafficking. But what is happening here is a bigger issue, which I think people have to understand. What the United States is doing is weaponizing human rights. It is selectively picking and choosing what it sees as violation of human rights and weaponizing it to use it against countries whose policies it does not like or leaders it does not like, right? So the ILO, for example, is very much penetrated by the CIA. Everyone
Mhm.
knows that. So to talk about to look at labor, people like there's another human rights group. All of these groups are penetrated by the CIA. Like the IAEA was penetrated by the CIA and give duplicitous information on Iran. So what we have to understand in the Caribbean is how the US weaponizes human rights and also how it creates false narratives, right? This is a critical thing to understand. So what we are being fed about the Cuban medical brigades and the Cuban doctors has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with the creation of a narrative that serves U.S. capitalism and U.S. Imperialism. For example, we have a problem in the Caribbean and in Africa where we spend money to train doctors and teachers. The United States spends money on wars, weapons in all over the world and military bases, and not on healthcare. So what do? They entice our medical professionals, our educators away. So I think there's a recruitment process taking place right now in parts of Africa and the Caribbean to get teachers to come to the United States because they are not training teachers, right? There are more doctors in African doctors in the US than in Africa. Yet you are not trying to help in that area, right? People are dying every day from diseases that is easily solved by primary health care, but you are looking at the Cuban medical brigades. So we are dealing with two things here: a narrative that has been created to promote a false representation of what is happening in Cuba and to promote U.S. capitalism and the commodification of healthcare. If people understand this, as the empire deteriorates, more and more you are going to see the human body become a sort of if you want to call it a commodity.
Mhm.
So they sell you bad food, give you bad medicine, and at the end of the day, you can't afford to pay for the healthcare that you will get you're supposed to get in the US because everything is commodified. Water, just now as somewhat the air will be commodified. Everything is commodified. And so the example of Cuba is something Fidel said. Part of the problem the US have with Cuba is a bad example. They don't want that example of solidarity and selflessness and internationalism to exist. And this is what the medical brigades represent: a pure and honest attempt at international solidarity and humanism. And so we need to contextualize this not in the arguments they are making about human trafficking and all of these things. It is pure and naked capitalism and imperialism, okay? And an attempt to compromise our sovereignty as Caribbean people. We
Okay.
have the right to choose. That's what we fought for. That's what our ancestors fought for. We have the right to choose. And you should not be using extra legal means to put us in a position where we cannot choose who we want to have a relationship with. This is what this is all about. This is not about doctors. This is about compromising our integrity, our independence, and our sovereignty. This is the real argument. And people in the Caribbean need to understand this has nothing to do Like, for example, in Trinidad, there were over 200 South African eye doctors, which I did a clinic with them for on Nelson Mandela Day. How come you never raised that as an issue? But human trafficking, But because you don't like Cuba, because you don't like what Cuba represents, you are making this an issue. So this is about narrative in the pursuit of imperialist control and hegemonic control. And this is what this is. It has nothing to do
I have to
with
go
human
a break. Overdue. I hope I could get some phone calls in when you come back. Big conversation. Big thanks. Break time. Serious reasoning with Sister Doc, Rosemari Mealy, and Brother Ako Mutota. And we're discussing the relevance, importance of knowing when anything we read, hear, listen to is valid, or if the propaganda or disinformation, and where they frame it specifically to Cuba and the medical brigades out of Cuba. The phone number is 280-5848, 280-5848. If anybody want to call in and add the 2 cents, do that. Sister Doc Rosemari, if the Caribbean loses the Cuban medical brigade, what next?
Well, thank you. I'm sorry we had a total blackout, quote unquote, here in my area. All the electricity went down, so I'm back again, thanks to the ancestors. But I just wanted to pick up on one last point before quickly running into that. There's a major tool now that they're using. The U.S. doesn't do its dirty work directly. The empire has tentacles, right? So the Organization of American States is really one of the tools that they're also using to pressure the countries to cancel all the medical contracts. How dare them to tell a sovereign nation to submit what their plans will be, who is a part of the medical brigades. I mean, that goes against total autonomy of sovereign states. So the OAS is being used also to carry out this dirty work. Now, the last point that you raise is a really important point, because I mean, frame the question for me, and then I can kind of focus more specifically on giving you a direct response.
After what Brother Ako said about our spineless Caribbean leaders' history, if they cave into U.S. will and we lose the services of the Cuban medical brigade,
people are going to die. People will die because some of these programs that they're being offered are life-saving. I mean, right now I feel terrible about all the elders who are from the Bahamas. They were waiting to go for life-saving eye care, to the cataract surgery and other kinds of ophthalmology surgeries. What's going to happen to those people? What's going to happen if the brigades leave the countries where they are? People are going to, that's it. Just like in the U.S., they're cutting off Medicare, all of the services, because they don't care about life. They care nothing about life. It's about profit, right? So that's the bottom line. People are going to die, okay? And Cuba has founded some of the most advanced technology to work with things like vitiligo, the coloring of the skin. There's so many of our people suffer from that. The whole idea, in Cuba, you don't have to get your limbs cut off if you have diabetes. They found a cure for that. The cures that they bring to the regions are so important. The technology that they bring, their healthcare technology that they bring. The nations, you will not have access to that. And the U.S. is not going to send doctors to anywhere because we don't have enough of them here right in the U.S. And that's the start.
Brother Ako, based on what you centered, the spinelessness of Caribbean leaders, if they give in to this U.S. demand, what would they not give in to? There's a phone call. Caller, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Yes, greetings once again, Sister Yaya.
Yes, brother.
In the name of the Most High, Allah, Jah, Bungiyu. I want to briefly say in regards to what you said earlier, when people travel or people need to travel to learn And that's what I did from a very young age. I realized my reality. I come from a poor family, had no money, but I used the way by hitchhiking. I left Belize, I reached Mexico, I reached California, I reached Panama, and by sea navigation, I traveled to other countries, but I was always urging to learn. I don't want to go there and come back. I don't know nothing. Just stand up in a corner, be a boy, that. I know my thing never. Now, next point. I was always a revolutionary type of person. From the age of 17, I watched all the atrocities done to our ancestors, and I say I don't want to be part of nothing that is European, nothing that is the belly of the beast, which is the open heart and Europe. I don't want to be a part of that, no. Why? I'm a revolutionary, but I was never a follower of Castro, because Castro did nothing for the Afro-Cubans in Cuba, but that's another context, very long. Going back to the point they are dealing with right now. I had come across, Brother David said, everybody have their own experience. I have come across a lot of Cubans in the US, in Florida, in Belize, in other countries, and most of those people tell me that they don't want to go back. You know, why won't you want to go back at a place that's supposed to teach you so well? Well, that's not what they say to me, and many of these people right here at Belize are people that work in the brigade, the medical brigade. I remember a doctor, a surgeon, he cried as a man, he cried to me, and he said, brother, I don't want to go back to Cuba. He said, but the only reason why I'm going back, going to the point that they say, I know they ban the United States side, but I'm saying, this is what he said to me. He said, brother, I don't want to go back, but if I don't go back, they want to pressure my family. He said, my parents are there, my wife, my children. So any one of us, that's what the brother said, that desert, like in the military, say if we desert the brigade, we might get away. He said we might go to another country, we might stay here, but our family is going to take pressure. And then I remember I met two Cubans that was in the military, right at Belize. They used to work for a rich man in Belize, but by X no call no name. Those two Cubans went to the military and they were sent to different places. Oh, they are defending the country, they are helping the country, but you know what they said to me? We didn't have no choice. That's how the two Cubans said to me. We had no choice, we have to go, because when they tell you time to go, you gotta go. You can't tell them no,
all right,
because there's
brother.
pressure.
Big
You know?
thanks. I don't have a lot of time left, so I want to make the answer your question.
All right.
All right,
So
thanks,
in
brother.
other words, finally then, this government from Cuba to any country is not free. They told me you gotta pay to the consul. I can't.
Okay, thanks, Gaines. Both of you heard that question. Which one would like to respond to the question?
I would like to respond.
Okay,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. sis.
Brother, thank you, brother. That is the narrative that is the narrative that folk want to hear. A lot of times when Cubans, but let me get into the race question, okay? A lot of times when Cubans leave Cuba and they come to they come to a capitalist country, they see, quote unquote, the benefits of capitalism, right? Okay, so that's an important point, and they don't want to go back to a socialist society where there is, quote unquote, everybody has and not one has. So that's a mentality that's constantly struggled against. Okay, and I'm not saying that everything in Cuba is great, right? But as a black woman of African descent living there for years, it was the only place where I felt free. Okay, so to my brother who has traveled all over, I suggest that you go to Cuba now, when it's the most difficult moments for the Cuban people, and then you can find out for yourself and compare the narrative that you got from those that you spoke to what people are saying and doing now. That's the only way. That's why we all anything. You see the good, you see the bad, you see the challenges, you see it all, and you return drawing your own opinion, not hearing from those dissidents and those who leave, okay? Because those who leave oftentimes they leave because they don't like the society. They don't agree with the society. Not everybody in Cuba is a socialist. Not everybody in Cuba is quote unquote a revolutionary, but they have the benefits. And I would dare say that every last one of those individuals that that brother spoke to, they could read and write. They were educated. And so they got free education. That's why they're able to be a doctor. That's why they're able to be a teacher. That's why they're enlightened. But they want, like in many places, they want the benefits of capitalism. They want the sneakers. They want the new clothes. They want the jewelry. They want the diamonds. What is freedom? What is freedom?
Respect. We're almost out of time. Brother Akka, you had something you wanted to say?
Yes, I ended to say to this brother, I was in Guyana about 3 weeks ago. And Guyana is supposed to be oil rich and with Exxon and so on. And I moved around quite a lot with taxis and so on. And in conversation with people, they would tell me, if everybody could get out of Guyana, they'll get out of Guyana. Despite the fact that they're supposed to be oil wealth, rich and so on. A few years ago, again in response to that, brother, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there are some Trinidadians who left Trinidad and sought asylum in Canada, saying they were oppressed in Trinidad. It wasn't true. But they sought asylum in Canada, right? So you have a situation in the Caribbean where our economies are depressed. Trinidad is very wealthy, and yet significant numbers of Trinidadians have to migrate abroad to make a living. Okay? You have a situation with Cuba, where for 60 years this country has been under a blockade, unable to develop. Of course there will be dissatisfaction. Of course there will be. Like it's the same thing in Jamaica. A lot of people don't know this. As a percentage of immigrants, there are more Jamaicans in the US than Africans. As a percentage. Jamaica has a very high level of immigration. So this is what I said earlier about the narrative. So you do have people who are dissatisfied in Cuba, and obviously so, because they want things. They wanted bright lights and so on. And they are dissatisfied. They blame it on the government, despite the fact that politically some of them don't understand that the US is deliberately creating these conditions. It was the same thing in the Soviet Union. Right?
I'll need to go to break quickly, Brother Akko. We're running out of time. And then when we come back, you all have like a minute to say your final thoughts. But I have to go to break. Sorry about that. Okay, break time.
Okay, no problem.
At Atlantic Bank, your convenience is our priority. Our contact center is designed to enhance your banking experience. With a wide range of customer service options, you save time and effort. You can easily call in to block or unblock your debit and credit cards, perform account inquiries, and access detailed card information. Whether you need assistance with online banking, merchant support, or general inquiries, our team is ready to help. For added convenience, if all operators are busy, you can leave your number and an operator will return your call as soon as possible to ensure you receive the support you need. Depending on your transaction type, we may need to verify your identity through a set of security questions. And remember, Atlantic Bank will never request your username or password for Atlantic Online via phone call, text, or email, ensuring your personal information remains safe and secure. Our support team is available Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in both English and Spanish. Simply dial 223-1212. This is a dedicated line for our contact center. Atlantic Bank is committed to providing you with exceptional service and the tools you need to manage your finances conveniently and securely. Take full advantage of our easy-to-use contact center services today.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
When the power goes out, life is disrupted. Be prepared and keep your home powered up with a generator from Benquip. We carry brands such as Honda, Kohler, and JCB, Schedule your installation, maintenance, and assessment to keep your generator ready and waiting to protect your family and home the next time the power fails. Stay in control of your power with a generator from Benquip. Equipment, parts, service.
Let's take a journey through the core functions of the Social Security Board. It all starts with registering as an insured person, employer, or self-employed individual. Sign up for a portal account to manage your Social Security information online. Just provide accurate information and click Create. This will give you access to a range of services and benefits. Next, your contribution, along with investments and other income, are collected and distributed into 3 funds. This ensures that the SSB fund is securely utilized to support various benefit programs. The SSB is committed to providing essential benefits such as sickness, maternity, injury, and pension. These benefits are paid out to eligible individuals as a part of the Social Security coverage. We help you navigate through life's challenges with financial security. Annual surplus accumulates to grow the fund each year. This surplus is invested into various industries, contributing to the growth and development of our nation. With each passing year, the fund continues to grow due to the annual surplus and interest revenue earned from prudent investments. This surplus, along with reserves, helps to bolster the SSB fund and provide a safety net for those in need. We've arrived at the end of our journey to better understanding how the SSB works. We remain committed to serving you and building a secure future for all Belizeans.
It's the Kikoker Lobster Fest 2025, and it's all going down Friday, July 18th, Saturday, July 19th, and Sunday, July 20th. The action kicks off Friday, July 18th with the opening ceremony at 7 p.m. with performances by the Belize Dance Company, Mariachi Los Halcones, and Agents of Groove.
From the time I reach, I walk in my way.
Then the action moves to Saturday, July 19th and Sunday, July 20th with a beach party, the Fisherman Lobster Competition and games, and music all day. On Saturday night, July 19th, you've got to be inside the dance called Rhythm and Waves with guest DJ Brandon Duke.
I just wanna party, party, party.
Lobster food and dishes will be on the menu for the entire Lobster Fest. Musical entertainment all weekend by DJ Julian, via Starter Sound, DJ Emo, DJ Silva, DJ Chris, Evolution Sound, Prince Kevin, and the Youth Connection Band, hosted by DJ Dalla. This year's Kikoker Lobster Fest sponsored by the Kikoker Village Council, Belize Tourism Board, Belikin, LED Belize, Travelers Rum, Rapidito Construction Depot, Atlantic Bank Limited, San Pedro Belize Express, Blue Zen, San Pedro Town Council, Tropic Air Limited, and Belize Bank Limited. It's the annual Kikoker Lobster Fest, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, July 18th, 19th, and 20th.
The shop, and the more calls, Sister Doc Rosemari, Mealy, you have a minute. Brother Akko, you have a minute for final thoughts. Go ahead.
Brother Akko, you go first.
So, Sister, on the race issue, racism is something we inherited from colonialism. And even in Trinidad, where we have an Indian and African population, there are still racial tensions, which are exacerbated from time to time by elections. In Guyana, it erupted in race violence at one point in time, instigated by the United States when they overthrew the government of Cheddi Jagan, I think in 1964. So while Cuba inherited these problems, differently, they are working on it systematically through laws and so on. I'm not saying it's perfect, but that's a reality of our inheritance from colonization. The thing I think we need to understand is the insidious role the US has played in our hemisphere in terms of invasion. In Panama, in Jamaica, the undermining of the Mealy government, as I indicated in Guyana before that. And not only that, the support of violence in which 73 nationals from the Caribbean were killed by a terrorist attack on a Cuban plane, the Cubana airline plane, which left Guyana, stopped in Trinidad, left Barbados, and was blown up outside of Barbados, and killing all 73 people abroad, some Caribbean nationals, and so on. So we have to understand this is just this thing with the Cuban Medical Brigade is just another attempt by the US to undermine Cuba and to deny it its independence and to sabotage the Cuban Revolution. This has nothing to do with any slave labor or forced labor by Cuban doctors.
Thanks for that, Akka. Sister Rosemari?
Well, I just want to share, thank you, number one, for allowing us to come on this morning to the people of Belize. I just want to leave with this point. I want to be in a country where there are no guns and where people are not killing each other, right? That is not happening in Cuba. I want to be in a country where people have access to health care. I want that. That is a desire that we should all have. And I want people to go to Cuba and see for themselves especially young people, to see for themselves what is happening in the orientation of the mind of young people. And I would encourage people that at this point, the United States government is denying a visa to the president of Cuba to come to the United Nations to speak at the General Assembly in September. Why would you want to not hear the voice of global leaders? Because every year countries come out in opposition, with the exception of two, the United States and Israel. They always vote against lifting the embargo. So why is there the necessity that the United States wants to deny even the president of Cuba to speak to the world body? That is the question that we have to keep in our minds. Why? And I think Brother Akko is absolutely correct. If you can keep information away from the people, then the people continue to remain ignorant and not understand. So I encourage the people of the Caribbean to stand up against the bully, stand up against it. And because that's a part of freedom, because Africa is doing it through Traore and Burkina Faso. And this information is so important. And thank you, Sister Yaya, for the work that you're doing, for carrying the truth, but continuing to carry forth the truth. And that's what we have to look for and search for.
Sister Rosemari, Brother Akko, big thanks for the time this morning. The person who called in, people who listen, text, remember the show repeat at 3:30 this afternoon. You may share the link at XTV YouTube, XTV Belize YouTube, XTV Belize Facebook. Share the link. This is the kind of information that we need that we don't get regularly. Brother and sister, thank you so much for the decades of commitment to the liberation of African people. Honor the people and save the people.
Save the people. Thank you, Sister. Thank you, Sister Rosemari.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Wake up, Billy.